Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Elia Kazan's A Streetcar Named Desire from 1951. So yes, here we are back again, a Kazan film and a Brando film to review here. And yes, this is of course, it's going to have spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen this film, certainly check this one out of course as well. This is a film you don't want to kind of receive spoilers for if you've not seen it, so yes, go ahead and watch this film if you can, and then preferably come back to this review because I will be getting into some definite spoilers here. But yes, this film, of course, and here it is, of course, on Blu-ray, HMV, kind of premium collection, this kind of edition here. But yes, I was looking forward to this film for a number of years, and of course, recently watching, of course, again on the waterfront. I reviewed that, of course, a few days ago now, and yeah, this is a film that I watched, a few days before, rewatching on the waterfront. But I reviewed that first, and then I wanted to come back to this film to review this, and to really let my thoughts kind of sink in, and when I watched this film, the other day, last week, kind of thing, I was blown away, literally. And I think this film, actually, I know on the waterfront it is kind of generally considered the better film, and stuff, and maybe the better Brando, film performance kind of thing. I think personally, I would take this film over that, and I think, well, that's a masterpiece on the waterfront. No doubt for me, I think this film is just leagues ahead of it, and I think just even the performance by Brando is even better in this film. This film just absolutely, as I say, blew me away, and wow, what a wonderful film this is. And, I think, of course, this is kind of one of the very first kind of Brando performances, of course, and he did get nominated for an Oscar here. All four of these kind of main players, you could say, of this film got nominated for an Oscar, and three of them won. Brando was the only one of these four main characters, where he didn't win the Oscar that year, of course, but he did win two other Oscars. But yeah, that's very interesting, and of course, Tennessee Williams, everyone's heard of him. Of course, helmed the original play, which was 47, and actually, some of these. A lot of these, actors, were actually in, the kind of Broadway production. Vivien Leigh was actually in the London theatre production. So yeah, it's kind of, kind of team up here, you could say. They all come together for this actual film adaptation. So it's very interesting there how they kind of originally did, in some way perform their roles, and then for this film, they kind of came together and made it as a film, adaptation. Of course, Tennessee Williams, kind of collaborated with Kazan on this kind of screenplay, and he is credited, of course, with the screenplay. Williams, but yes, this is generally considered, the best kind of this kind of story, the best, Tennessee Williams play, really, and this film, it is acclaimed as one of the greats, really, and just it's one of the best films of all time. Although it doesn't really, I think, get as kind of as much discussion, at least as I thought it would have done. Perhaps compared to, say, On the Waterfront, it's kind of interesting, I think, how this isn't kind of talks about a little bit more. But I think that's fine. I just certainly I took to this one even more than, say, that film, and this is just an absolute masterpiece of cinema in my opinion. And I think what was going on here, the different themes, and just the way in which this is kind of this fantastical, dreamlike film, although it's very much, very contained at times. The kind of very small, locations, very contained, very kind of claustrophobic. It is kind of course, it has similarities to generally a play in the way it's kind of staged, of course. There are other locations in the film, but mainly, primarily it does focus at least around, this apartment, Stanley, of course, and Stella being the kind of inhabitants of this apartment. And of course, as we know, this plot, the main plot, is very interesting, and there's so much exposition in this film, kind of, that goes to, what happened before, the past, of Blanche, her life. But yes, of course, the character of Blanche, played by the wonderful Vivien Leigh, and she is just Vivien Leigh is one of the, for me, one of the greatest, actors of all time, and I think, if you're wanting this kind of for a list, perhaps these kind of things, in terms of female performances, I think actually her performance in another film, that could be very obvious, I think could be the absolute greatest in the history of cinema. And this film, she is absolutely perfect in. Brando gets a lot of kind of, there's a lot of kind of attention to his performance in particular, but I think, well, the whole cast are flawless in my opinion, and especially Vivien Leigh, she gives an absolutely stunning performance. Very, very kind of complex character, very unhinged. We'll get to that, but she very different styles of acting here. I wouldn't say that it's kind of one is kind of definitely more effective in its actual form, in that sense, but I think in this film, maybe yes, Brando is kind of the standout in many ways, but Vivien Leigh kind of just as good in many regards, and I think she gives such a wonderful performance. It's unreal, I think, and she, of course, this character of Blanche, yes, she's kind of escaping, her place in Mississippi, and she kind of comes to this place in New Orleans to kind of stay with her sister, Stella, of course, played by Kim Hunter, and she is wonderful too, and she really, really is, of course. Actually, this year, it's very interesting. I've watched two films for the first time, where Kim Hunter is one of the main kind of actors, of course, Match of Life and Death, back in January I watched for the first time, and now here we are with this film, so that's very, very interesting, of course. Wonderful in both, in this film, of course, she plays Stella, of course, when you say that name, in regards to this film, you kind of, you think maybe that scene, I had seen, that kind of scene before, of course, but, very, very iconic kind of moment in cinema. We'll get to that, of course, but yes, Blanche is coming to New Orleans to stay with her sister, and she was a kind of high school teacher, of course, and her husband, of course, passed away as well. We'll get to that, and it's all these different mysterious moments, at first, and of course, when she kind of exits, this vehicle, she's kind of, kind of surprised at the location, how kind of maybe poor it is, perhaps, and this is one of the very interesting things about this kind of film, is the way it kind of plays into class differences. It's very, very interesting, this film, highly compelling, and I think masterfully constructed, in these first sort of 10 minutes or so, the dynamics, of course, between the different characters, Stella, Stanley, and yes, Blanche, especially this kind of trio in the film, is so wonderfully done. This is genius writing here, and I think just the initial kind of moments when Stanley and Blanche kind of interact, it is something so interesting here. The dynamics between these two characters, complete opposites, but both, you could say, in different ways, very kind of unhinged. Stanley is someone who is, we'll get to, becomes, quite clear that he is just this very animalistic character, indeed, and very abusive character, something that is so powerfully explored in this film. I guess this play is a kind of this way of domestic abuse, this kind of violence, that kind of is kind of explored mainly through this character, of Stanley, and the way he treats, particularly, of course, Stella, and eventually Blanche. It's very, very shocking, this film, of course, and yes, there are things that are implied later on in the film and aren't necessarily shown, of course, but it really, nevertheless, it's kind of, it's so powerful. Very, very dark film. I didn't expect it to be quite as dark as this. I think the second half kind of goes in an even darker route. Really amps it up, and it becomes a very, very yes, dark film indeed. The ending, if you've seen the film, of course, this being a spoilers review, the ending is so tragic. That's one of the things. This is a tragedy. It's very, very Shakespearean in many regards as well, and I think the way this film plays it out, really so powerful, so tragic, of course. And, looking back to the beginning, maybe kind of joyous encounters at times, between maybe Stella and Blanche. This kind of initial meeting, of course. And, yes, you look back to these moments, at least I did, and kind of it's very, very sad in the ending, of course, and the kind of mental illness, this state, madness really overtakes Blanche, and of course, as we know, she is taken away, and one of the kind of positives about the ending, in terms of the kind of the sense of hope in that sense, is a very dark ending, but the actual sense of, Stella saying she's going to leave Stanley, of course, with the kid, that is kind of at least a positive outcome, of this actual story, and, I think actually it's different in the play, perhaps, I've heard, but yes, this film, is so full of these moments, just joy early on, and these relationships, of course, Blanche as well kind of starts this relationship with Mitch, played of course by Karl Malden, and he's in this film, of course. He's also on the waterfront, and he is so good in this film. I think he's better in this than he was in on the waterfront, and yes, just this character of Mitch, and this relationship between Mitch and Blanche. It's kind of the kind of way in which he kind of tries to reconnect, with different people, but then in the end, it's a shame. The tragedy is that she maybe can't anymore in so many regards, and I think that kind of the way in which that relationship is kind of explored in the film is so powerful. It's so tragic as well. The way in which it plays out, of course, and in the sense that it can't quite be in that sense because of her state of mind and many different reasons as well. It's a very complex film. I can't dig into this fully because we'd be here hours actually. It's very, very complex, this kind of story, but the way the film is shot and edited, of course, as well, it's something truly remarkable as well. The score, of course, by Alex North, actually plays into the kind of the characters' minds, the kind of different personalities, perhaps, the kind of psychology of this film, different kind of moments, and the use of sound in general, perhaps with these kind of, flashbacks, these kind of episodes, of course, that Blanche is having, and, these kind of the use of music and just sound in general, and the lack of sound, for example, at times, is something truly remarkable. This is masterful stuff, and I think, yes, the way this film is shot, and I've said this film's kind of fantastical, of course. There's kind of this clash, really, of fantasy and realism, which can go throughout many, many films, of course. That's one of the most important things for me, in cinema, actually, when we're creating a world, is to kind of blend fantasy and realism. You can kind of balance this out, and I think this film really, Blanche is this kind of this character, this kind of personality who kind of embodies this kind of fantastical feeling, and on the opposite kind of end of the spectrum, you've got Brando's character of Stanley, who is this raw, kind of straight talking, no nonsense, you could say, character, but very, very violent, aggressive, just someone who really dominates, the kind of screen when he's on it, in this sense. And I love the way in which Vivien Leigh responds to all of Brando's kind of gestures in the film. It truly is something else. This works in harmony. These two performances here. It's not just Brando and then Vivien Leigh. These two kind of main characters. I really think that this is so perfectly kind of the kind of connection here, and the way in which they bounce off of it, one another. Is truly something else, and really the way in which Vivien Leigh responds to Brando's, as I say, these gestures, these moments, from the character, is truly something else. I think, and the vulnerability, of Vivien Leigh's performance here. This is very, very emotional. This film, and I think she really perfects this performance. As I say, she really doesn't get as much credit for this film. I believe, I think a lot of things possibly kind of overshadow this kind of. These different performances, Kim Hunter as well, so good in this film. And I think the way in which her character's kind of, yes, this is in between, perhaps, but at the same time, I think she's such an interesting character. She's not just this someone that's just there. She really is. I think every single character, his main characters, are so compelling. That it's such a rich character study. Individually, and as a whole, these dynamics, of course, and then you can say the external factors as well, the location, the kind of social class, the differences, of course, kind of in this kind of mix of personal and just these macro themes. But it's not a film, an epic film in many regards. But I think the way in which this film kind of explores the past of these characters, is something else. Just through dialogue and of course through different cinematic techniques as well. The kind of use of sound perhaps really just involves me so much, enraptures me. It kind of transfixes me for the entire runtime. It does turn very, very dark, particularly after the kind of hour and 10 mark. Really that's when it kind of really starts to kind of show this real descent into madness perhaps. And this character Blanche, she really spirals out of control really, and the ending is just, it's something that I kind of predicted. It's one of them genius endings where you kind of predict, you don't really want to happen, of course, but it just, when it does, even though you kind of where it's going, it just kind of, even then, it really shocked me. And I think that's of course to do with the actual how wonderful this narrative is in its flow, in how it kind of makes me care about these characters. I really sympathised with this character Blanche, and of course Stella, as well, and even Mitch as well. Stanley is someone who really is the villain of the film. I didn't think that this would be as kind of shocking. Brando in this film really is really scary performance here, and I think this character of Stanley is someone who is so aggressive and kind of imposing. It's something else. Whenever he's on screen, Brando, of course, it's something else. It really disturbs me, and I think just these dynamics, of course, between these different characters, but just to see Brando in this way, I think it's something else. It's a very, very disturbing film, and just the way this film goes, as I say. Particularly in the second half, or later on in the second half, of course, it really is very, very hypnotic. It's kind of like a fever dream, perhaps, as well, in the way the film's shot, the way that time is played within this film, the editing, of course, and just the overall the lighting. That's something that's very, very interesting in this film. I think this is such a layered film in its cinematography and the editing, and I think this is actually better than On the Waterfront in that sense as well. I'm not trying to compare them constantly, but I think this film really is. I don't imagine, for example, seeing another Kazan film that I personally prefer to this, because this is really, really, particularly an exceptional piece of cinema, in my opinion. This is just absolutely stunning, and yes, just this kind of the setting as well really plays into the kind of the atmosphere, the way it's established, and later on as well, in the way that you kind of feel this claustrophobic nature, and Blanche is kind of she cannot kind of handle this, and of course these advances, of course, by Brando's character, Stanley, and the kind of failure, to connect, to kind of sustain. That's the main thing. She does have a connection to the character of Mitch, and he really, of course, is attracted to her, but then it doesn't quite play out, and then of course it really takes a turn in the final act. It's such a shocking, tragic kind of finale, but as I've said, it's this bittersweet kind of ending, because although it doesn't turn out well for Blanche, it does kind of have hope, in the sense of the character of Stella, and how she kind of is going to escape this kind of abusive household here, and take the kid, and because the way that the kind of this is going, I thought, I hope this doesn't kind of end perhaps with this kind of situation, and the way that she left in this situation. But luckily, this film version at least, kind of shows this, implies this, and we don't see, of course, what happened after, but you do kind of get the implication that she's going to leave, and that's how the film kind of ends, showing this final shot, just lingering on this apartment, and I think that's a perfect ending here, one of the best that I've seen, at least in a long time, and this film really hit me. This is actually it's not just a masterpiece, it actually gets into my plus tiers, which we'll get to very, very soon, but all these different themes that are kind of being explored in this manner throughout the film. You know, it really is something else. You know, isolation, loneliness. It's one of them films that masterfully kind of explores this. You know, different roles as well. You know, kind of physically. You know, and also being social class differences. I love the way it kind of explores the past as well. You know, this kind of family, you could say. You know, of course, of Stella and Blanche. You know, their kind of family history here, and the kind of the kind of you know, the implications here, and the kind of callbacks, of course, to their past through different items, but in particular, of course, as well, and just the way in which you know, Blanche is kind of experiencing these flashbacks. You know, we don't actually in the film ever physically see, for example, perhaps moments, you know, different scenes in Mississippi, for example, with Blanche, you know, or anything to do with Stella, but we don't need to. You know, the way this film, you know, kind of plays out the dialogue, you know, these moments of exposition, and these kind of hints, very subtle hints in the film, are all we need to kind of piece together. And kind of, you know, to leave the wonder in there, the sense of wonder, the kind of, the way in which we kind of, you know, are kind of thinking, you know, kind of trying to piece together, you know, of what we're kind of hearing from these characters, in that sense, about their past. And you know, it's one of the things actually the film deals with. You know, it's kind of this, particularly with Blanche, you know, it's kind of how she can't escape from her past, and you know, how it kind of, you know, it kind of hinders, you know, her relationships in the film, and her actual way of life. And that's one of the things that kind of overcomes her, actually, is, you know, it's kind of how she's haunted perhaps by her past. And that's one of the things, of course, leading really to the kind of the inevitable, you know, final moments, and the actual outcome for her character in particular. And I love how bold this film is in the way it plays out. You know, this is not, you know, fully happy ending. Of course, it's a thoroughly complex ending. It's got its kind of its moments that are very positive. For example, with Stella, and you know, stuff there. But Blanche, you know, it's truly I wouldn't say a downbeat ending, you know, but it really is something very, very disturbing, very dark, and thoroughly tragic. You know, I can't wait to see this film again. But it's going to be at least a few months, because I really want to kind of, that ending, you know, really is very, very dark for her character, and you know, adds so much weight, you know, I guess, to when I rewatch this film, you know, to kind of seeing these moments where this character, you know, this sympathetic character, does try to kind of move on, perhaps, and to kind of, yeah, it's just this, the fact of, you know, the initial kind of moments of seeing these two characters, Stella and Blanche. You know, I just loved the interactions. It's so wonderful, this film, as always, like classic films, really, always charming. This sense of just sincerity that I don't get really with a lot of modern films. As I've said before, you know, I love classic cinema a lot more. You know, the 50s is just potentially, you know, the greatest decade. You know, I'd probably, you know, slightly give the edge to the 70s. You know, for my for the kind of high points. You know, for example, going through my list of favourite films. But you know, the 50s as well. You could say is at least a close second. You know, the overall kind of quality, and you know, just different directors working here. You know, at their peak. I think Kazan, you know, is certainly a director who kind of, you know, it's clearly at its height here. You know, of course, East of Eden as well. You know, I've not seen yet, but you know, On the Waterfront and Streetcar Named Desire. This film here, you know, are truly remarkable works, and I think I'd actually give the edge to this film here. You know, as kind of masterful, you know, On the Waterfront is. I think I connect to this film more. I think it's a better film, and I think it's the more affecting kind of piece cinematically, and just in these characters, you know, in the way it's kind of exploring different themes, and you know, doing it in particular ways, you know, in the kind of fantastical qualities this film has. And I think the warmth of this film actually is, you know, it's a warmer film for me, although it does have a much darker ending. You know, I think these moments, really moments to cherish early on, you know, with these different characters, the interactions, and just the kind of the sympathy, you know, the sympathetic, you know, layered, complex character that Vivien Leigh plays. You know, she is just perfect in this film. You know, Vivien Leigh, of course. And I think the vulnerability that she kind of brings to this character, you know, is essential here. I think this is perfect perfect casting here. This is something else, and of course Tennessee Williams, and Kazan working on the screenplay here. It's actually one of the best scripts I've ever kind of encountered. I'll certainly be kind of going through this to kind of study as well, and I just think it's such a remarkable film. It really, really is. It's a powerful film. Throughout every kind of act, really. Of course, you've got that initial kind of encounters with the different characters, and the initial kind of moments of comedy, perhaps awkwardness. I love the kind of the way in which Brando kind of enters the apartment, of course, and the different moments there. That is genius cinema there. The acting, the staging, the way in which the camera moves, following Brando, and the way he kind of imposes on Blanche, and the way she kind of responds. All the reaction shots in this film are remarkable, of course. And as we know, in the first act, or the first half, which is, I definitely prefer the first half. I think actually, if the film had gone, to the at least to the hour and 10 mark, if it had been, to that kind of, for my enjoyment, to that level throughout the entire film, although I love the entire film, if it had been to that level, I think it could have been, up, another tier perhaps, quite easily. But this, of course, is very different in the second half. Or do I do love it, kind of thing. I do love, the second half, but I do think that the first half is my favourite. If I was asked that, but of course, in that first half, you have this very, very, very famous, kind of scene, of course, with Brando, Hey Stella, of course, I'd seen, at least a remnant of that clip before, that kind of 2 minute or so scene there, but wow, to see this, kind of in the context of the film, and actually the entire kind of sequence there, it is one of the best moments I've seen in cinema. It really, really is, of course, and the way in which Stella, comes down the stairs there, even just the reaction, by Kim Hunter, when she's kind of inside the apartment, it's such a, you could say it's a bizarre sequence, but it really is something else. And I think the way she walks down the stairs there, the reaction by Brando, it's something else. I've said this is a raw performance by Brando, but it is at the same time this kind of very, massive performance, grand, the kind of theatrical moments as well, although it's very, realistic, kind of perhaps gritty, raw performance. It's raw in both ways, and that's kind of the genius of this. It's kind of this smooth, charming performance, this big, kind of theatrical kind of performance here, but again, very raw, very kind of unpredictable, and very gritty, and the naturalism as well that he brings, it just kind of combines. It's not just this, realistic, whatever that means in cinema performance. That can be so many different things, of course. It's not just that. It really is this blend, I feel, of the two, and I think the way in which Brando performs that scene is just remarkable. That can kind of sum the film up. It's a very strange film, very, very hypnotic, of course. It's kind of like a fever dream, and I think the weather, the kind of, and the location, and the way in which sound is played with, really comes into that kind of element of just this very strange, disturbing film, and kind of just sieves, into your kind of your consciousness. And I think the way this film plays out in its narrative really is genius. This is one of the best films that I've ever seen, and I'm so glad I kind of watched it last week. And then of course went to back again to on the waterfront, to kind of see which the different comparisons, of course. Although it's not necessary to kind of compare them. I think it's very, very interesting. I personally would take this film over that masterpiece, of course, but this film really is one of the special masterpieces, in my opinion. I think this film really just blew me away, and I think just all these performances, the way this film is shot and edited, I think the direction throughout, is kind of course, very contained film in many regards, but I think the way Kazan directs this film is truly stunning. The blocking in the film, the way in which he brings out these performances, no doubt. Of course, he did, work on the original, production, of course, as well, and all these different, actors, these main actors, did at some point, kind of perform these different roles, kind of excluding, outside of this film, in particular. But I think, despite that, there is something to truly kind of behold here, in which the way the film is directed, and the casting, and the way that, of course, the performances are kind of, enhanced by, of course, Kazan and his methods, and I think the way in which Brando brought his own kind of methods to the acting, and of course, all these different, actors bringing what they wanted to this film in a particular way, that the combination here, and of course the Alex North score, and the way in the film, it's kind of just this wonderful adaptation of this stunning play by, of course, Tennessee Williams, and the way he kind of worked on the script, particularly for this film. I think the end result is just one of the most remarkable, films, that I've seen, and among my favourite films of all time. So yes, overall for me, this is a perfect, a flawless masterpiece, in my opinion, and as I've said, this does get into my plus tiers. Of course, for those of you who follow my channel, you'll know what my plus tiers are, but for example, around 200 or so, more than 200 now, films do kind of get into, my top 200 kind of films, or so, do get into the plus tiers, generally, of course, and these are the kind of the films that, I consider real, truly special masterpieces, kind of a combination of quality and my personal connection to a film. Of course, I've got the 4 different plus tiers, tier 3 being the kind of first tier on this kind of poll, perhaps, this kind of these bands, of course, and anything in my plus tiers, regardless, films that I truly adore, and this film could have been in the tier 2 mark. It's very, very close, and actually it could on a rewatch get into this kind of tier. But for now, of course, after my first initial watch of this film, I have to give this film 100% plus. Tier 3, so yes, an extremely high rating, especially for a film that I've only just seen for the first time. Films, as I've said, do grow on me. Of course, when I rewatch my favourites, I just find more and more, to kind of love about most films. Of course, and seeing a film when you know the outcome, of course, can really enhance the experience. It always does, especially with tragedy. In terms of tragedies, I think this is one of the very, very greatest kind of tragic works, in the medium, of course, and I think it's just a wonderful film. It's not a fully dark film. It does have its moments of comedy and wonderful scenes, especially in the first half. Different interactions. I think a truly uplifting film as well. Really such a kind of, just in the way it kind of is so sincere, the sincerity of the picture, and the way it's kind of just exploring these kind of human characters, and really this kind of the outcome, particularly with Stella, is truly satisfying. I feel, and just the way in which this is so, bold, though, in the way it's kind of exploring, Brando's character, perhaps, in particular, in the way he kind of treats different people, of course, and the way he's very animalistic, and the aggression, of course, and the kind of power struggles, of course, and the way that, at least in the end, I feel, at least Stella kind of got away from this man, and it's a very, very a truly powerful film. Also love the way in which the kind of the two sisters, of course, Blanche and Stella, kind of their kind of relationship is explored. The kind of past as well you get to these characters. The kind of hints, of course. You don't get too much. You're left with a lot of wonder there. Enough to kind of piece together for yourself. But again, you do get enough to kind of, at least I did, to get fully invested in these characters and root for these characters, of course. But again, they're all kind of there's something about this film. A lot of these characters have very, very kind of interesting kind of traits to them. I don't think any of these characters are kind of fully innocent, of course. At different moments where they're kind of the flaws are revealed. Perhaps the human flaws of these characters. So it's a very, very interesting film. I can't wait to rewatch this film. It really is something that's highly layered. I think even more so than perhaps on the waterfront, for example. But again, I'm not comparing them too much. But it's very, very interesting to kind of see these films, together, and to kind of compare them of course, On the Waterfront being, a lot more acclaimed and loved, of course. I personally would prefer, this film. I do take A Streetcar Named Desire over On the Waterfront. If you want that kind of, the answer there. If you're wondering that, I think that definitely this is by far the better film for me, and I do think they're both masterful. But this is, my favourite Kazan film currently. And I don't think that would change. This really, really blew me away. I love this film from start to finish. Very, very tragic ending, but again, very hopeful as well in certain moments. But Blanche, her character there, really, really just a sad ending. A highly tragic film, and the way that kind of she's explored her character in the film is something else. The way it kind of taps into her kind of state of mind is very, very unnerving, and the way in which all of these characters are performed absolutely perfect, masterful performances, of course, by everyone involved. I love the different relationships in the film, and I love the setting, the way the kind of atmosphere seeps into this kind of narrative in itself, and I think just the way in which Brando just really, this is one of his very, very best performances. I think actually this could be possibly his second best, although it's very, very close, those two there. But the best for me, the absolute greatest, in my opinion, is from The Godfather. That's just, one of the very, very, maybe top 20 or so kind of performances, in the history of cinema. But I think, this film could be, at least very close to being his second best performance. And yes, he is really the villain, essentially, of the film, and but again, these characters are kind of portrayed in very, very complex ways and very balanced ways. It's a very interesting film, highly compelling, and one of my, at least among my favourites. Not kind of top 100, but it's not a film that I kind of, I don't consider, a true masterpiece in that sense. So yes. Tell me your thoughts on this film. What do you think of it? If you've seen the film, of course, if you plan on watching this film, just tell me your thoughts regardless. What do you think? And yes, it'd be great to discuss different Brando films, of course, and yes, different films, in this vein, of course. And yes, I just love this film. I love Vivien Leigh, as always. I love Brando, Kim Hunter, Karl Malden. He's so great in this film again, and it's just a wonderful film. Wonderful direction by Kazan. I really think he was just such a great director, such a great individual, a true artist in my opinion, and very minimalist at times, you could say, although I definitely beg to differ on this occasion. His direction is something more than kind of capturing the performances. This is really something else, and yes, tell me your thoughts on everything about this film, and as always, cinema. So yes, I do have some more reviews planned. I think, of course, carrying on with Bond, The Spy Who Loved Me, of course, being the next film to talk about again, and just various other films. I want to once again talk about Monty Python. Starting, I think I would like to start actually with the meaning of life, and then kind of work my way back, to the other feature films for now at least, and then eventually I could definitely review the actual show, of course, Flying Circus. That'd be very interesting, but I really want to talk about Monty Python, rewatching, of course, the main three features again very recently, and I can't wait to see that. And yes, more reviews to come. So yes, tell me your thoughts. Let's talk about this film, and as I say, just everything cinema, as we always do in the comments. So yes, as always, stay safe, of course, and I hope you're all well. And as always, thanks for watching.